Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch, our show following all the news and rumors on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. I'm Daemon Hatfield, and as always, I am joined by Jonathon Dornbush, host of IGN's PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond.
Beyond. Hey, Damon.
Hello there. And Ryan McCaffrey, host of IGN's Xbox podcast, Podcast Unlocked.
Good to see you, Damon.
You as well. And the big acquisitions in the video game industry continue. Big news this week, coming just 2 weeks after Microsoft's announcement that it plans to acquire Activision Blizzard for $70 billion. Now Sony plans to acquire Bungie, developer of, well, the original Halo, but these days Destiny and Destiny 2, for a far smaller sum. Jonathon, was it 3.6 billion?
3.6, yes. Yeah.
3.6 billion for Bungie. So we want to take a look. We want to discuss that news. We want to take a look at who's left in the industry and who might make sense for both Microsoft and Sony to acquire in the future, since both companies have said that more acquisitions are underway. So, Jonathon, let's start with you. What was your reaction to the news this week? Sony is acquiring Bungie.
I mean, it's obviously Sony trading for Microsoft getting Crash and Spyro. Sony wanted the creators of Halo. It just makes sense. It is funny how those things can change hands like this. But no, it's a stranger deal than I think any of the other PlayStation acquisitions we've seen. It comes with a few caveats for where Bungie is in sort of the whole Sony ecosystem of things, how they relate to worldwide studios and whatnot. But I think it all plays into sort of what Sony's plan has been kind of gestating over the last few years. And we've seen some of that crystallize also with recent comments in an earnings call. This feels like a push and a gambit to get more into spaces PlayStation has not been. And by bringing on Bungie, they have a team that has had nearly a decade of experience in the live service space and probably gone through some of the most tumultuous and public-facing, ups and downs of working within that space and figuring out the problems of it, figuring out what the tech and the community reactions to those things. Rather than having to go through all that R&D themselves, they now have that expertise, that technology right in-house. It I think is going to go a long way, especially because we know now Sony wants to make a bigger dent in that space as well.
Now, obviously, this announcement wasn't in response to Microsoft acquiring Activision Blizzard. I'm not a businessman, but I'm pretty sure that multi-billion-dollar deals take a little longer than 14 days to put together. But Ryan, what was your reaction? Obviously, Microsoft is trying to bring the most popular shooter franchise, Call of Duty, in-house. You think this is a good thing for Sony? Is it a loss for Microsoft?
I thought it would be a loss for Microsoft at first. I sat down and my immediate reaction was, oh, well, boy, it's been a hell of a run and they've meant so much to Xbox, but sounds like they're going to still be putting games out on Xbox, which is great. In fact, this whole thing, these last few weeks it's kind of funny to me in the sense that it almost feels like Sony and Microsoft are switching bodies, because you've got Microsoft now being the one buying studios to make their stuff exclusive, and Sony buying studios to keep their stuff multi-platform. And Sony's trying to get more multiplayer games because they were so strong in single player, and Microsoft has been stronger in multiplayer, and they're trying to get single player games now. So I couldn't help but kind of laugh a little bit at the bigger picture of that. But yeah, it seems like, it's definitely going to be a win for Bungie. Obviously, they're the ones that for sure win. They, as Jonathon mentioned, they get to continue to kind of, Bungie's always been treated in a very special way. They were given the royal treatment when they were at Microsoft, and they made that sort of big deal with Activision where they had a lot more, say, control and creative control and things than the typical Activision studio arrangement. And now, as in joining Sony, they get to sit not underneath PlayStation Studios, but alongside them. But so it's a great deal for Bungie, and it'll certainly pay off for PlayStation gamers because they're going to be a PlayStation first studio. But it seems as though PC and Xbox players will continue to get to live in the worlds that Bungie creates. So I can't complain.
Yeah, just to go off what Ryan was saying, the big picture of it all, I think, is one of the most interesting things, because no shade to, I think, either company, but obviously you can kind of look at Xbox's acquisitions as the stumbles of the Xbox One loomed large, and so this has helped them shore things up. Rather than spend a decade trying to solidify brand new franchises, they can just bring those in-house with money. And the same way that PlayStation is rather than trying to solidify live service multiplayer technology that they haven't really invested in, they can just buy that. And so both sides get to kind of not cheat, but they get to accelerate both
Fast
of those.
forward, yeah.
Yeah, those deficits that they both had. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting sort of switching bodies, I think is a great way to put it, Ryan. It really feels like we're seeing both sides of it now.
Well, just a month into the new year, and the video game industry is really seeing a seismic sea change. It's not immediate, of course. The Activision Blizzard deal for Microsoft won't finalize until summer of 2023, but both of these acquisitions represent really, really big changes in the landscape of the industry. And these companies are not done. We know more acquisitions are coming, so we could perform a little thought exercise and look at what publishers are still out there, independent, and who might make sense for each company, Microsoft and Sony, to want to acquire. We should note that this isn't. This is sort of separate from whatever our personal feelings may be about consolidation in entertainment. Whether or not we think it's good or bad, the reality is it's happening. So we can use our expertise and what we know about these companies' track records to sort of make educated guesses about what might be next for them. So with that said, I think the big players that are left out there, let me know if I'm missing anyone big, but I think there's Electronic Arts, there's TakeTwo, Bandai Namco, Square Enix, Ubisoft, Konami, Sega, Capcom, and Warner Brothers. There's some smaller ones out there, and I think Jonathon in particular, and Ryan as well, may have some smaller ones in mind too. But I think those are the big players out there that are still left on the table. So, Jonathon, let's start with you.
Yeah.
If Sony were going to announce another acquisition, who would make the most sense?
Well, in terms of those big players, I think a lot of them are most likely, at least at the moment, off the table. I mean, never say never at this point, because I would have said the same about Activision. But, we just got word from EA during one of their earnings calls that they see themselves as an acquisitioning company, not one to be acquisitioned. Take-Two obviously had that Zynga acquisition as well. So they seem like pretty stable and wanting to try at least being on their own for a bit. I think one of the biggest question marks right now, and it's because of the weirdness of consolidation and conglomeration across the entertainment industries, is WB. AT&T, Warner Media is being spun off again. This continues to happen to them, but they're being spun off and merging with Discovery, I believe. And so there's this interesting point where it's potentially that WB Games may be looked at as sort of a secondary branch. They could be sold off. There were rumors and suggestions that this could happen, I believe, last year. And then WB said, oh no, it's too valuable, so we're not going to sell. It almost seemed like a reaction to everyone being surprised that they would sell. But, in terms of fulfilling the Sony lineup, I don't think Sony is trying to double down on the companies that they already have similar games to, unless it is someone that they, have a longstanding partnership with, but they're trying to make up for the gaps in their genres and their stable of games. So I do think someone like a NetherRealm, if they are on the table at some point, if WB puts those studios up for either individual sale or wholesale, I think NetherRealm could be of big interest to Sony, because they've put a ownership stake in Evo. Sony clearly has a vested interest in the fighting game arena and that space in general. And what's a bigger franchise to get together than Mortal Kombat and, maybe even Injustice if they're allowed to continue working on WB games. That is not a small one to have. And obviously there's a lot of strange red tape that could happen with these other mergers and purchases and selling going on. So there's all that sort of those caveats. But I think Sony probably wants a fighting game at this point, and NetherRealm is probably a pretty good candidate.
That's interesting, especially in light of the fact that, I'd forgotten until you mentioned it, that Sony bought Evo. They are owning, the big fighting tournament, and I could see them wanting to have a big fighting game developer under their belt as well. Anyone else?
Yeah, for me, the other possibilities are, I'd say a couple smaller ones, because I think the two that get most thrown around right now for Sony that seem to make sense to people is Konami and Square Enix. And I think both of those are in strange cases where those companies aren't just gaming companies. They do a lot of outside business, whether it's publishing in books or toys, or, I think Konami does fitness equipment. There are all these different things and questions that would have to come out with those larger businesses. So I think we're going to continue to see exclusive partnerships like we've seen, with Final Fantasy and things like that. And, there have been reports Konami is interested in reviving Silent Hill, Castlevania, and Metal Gear. So I could see Sony getting exclusives, but I don't think they'll necessarily sell. But I think Square is kind of one people ask the most about. I think looking at a couple smaller ones, though not relatively, Arc Systems, again, another really big fighting game developer who has done a wide swath of different really, really well-acclaimed fighting games. I think among them Dragon Ball Fighter Z and a few others. I hope it's Fighter Z and not Fighters, but forgive me, fighting game community, if I'm wrong. But they, again, I think would fill a big gap. They've done PlayStation exclusives before, PlayStation and PC. The Guilty Gear Strive is, I think, one of their most recent games that was really, really well received. They feel like a pretty natural fit if Sony is, again, trying to look for genre collection and trying to, fill out the genre Infinity Stones, as Ryan has said before on the show. And then the other that comes to mind, I'm actually going to give credit that Arc Systems was a suggestion of Jada on Podcast Beyond, and then Mark, my other co-host on Podcast Beyond, suggested MiHoYo, the developers of Genshin Impact, which is huge for PlayStation. Genshin is a really, really big platform exclusive. It's on, PlayStation and mobile as well even. But that is a really, really big game for them. It does incredibly well. It is a free-to-play live service game that has millions of players, and PlayStation has been trying to make bigger inroads into China in general. With the PS5 launch, we saw a lot more promotion there. Games like Genshin are obviously very big there. So if there was something possible within China, obviously I don't know, again, what sort of legalities might happen across territories, but I could see them being interested, if not completely owning, at least divesting more of a stake, or investing, more of a stake in them.
Yeah, and Sony also said this week that it plans to launch, 10 live service games by 2026?
Yeah, exactly. So looking at 10 from Sony.
Yeah, so having the developer of Genshin Impact, would make a lot of sense in that respect.
Yeah.
Arc System Works is another interesting one, especially that would give them two, fighting game studios. The Konami one is really interesting because I don't think most of Konami's revenue these days comes from its video game properties. Obviously, it owns a lot of popular video game properties: Metal Gear, Silent Hill, Contra,
Bomberman. Come on,
of course,
yeah, which was formerly Hudson, but yeah,
Konami is a really, really strange one because my only reticence to say why doesn't Sony acquire those franchises is, one, that would mean Sony, if they didn't acquire the teams who are there, and I guess not making games at the moment, they'd need to find people to develop those games. But two, I also feel like Konami probably would have done that already. They clearly have wanted to hold on to these franchises to a certain extent. And, whether it is re-releasing classics or making new ones, I don't know why they've held on to them and done so little all this time. So I guess unless the money was right, I don't see why they would sell them now as opposed to earlier.
I don't think they don't really have a large AAA gaming development staff over there these days.
I don't
to
think
even
anymore.
Make those kind of, I think Sony would be, or anybody buying them would really be buying IPs first and foremost.
Yeah, exactly.
And have to find teams to build them.
Well, and go ahead. Sorry.
Konami operates like fitness centers in Japan, and their slot machine business is big. If you fly out of the Las Vegas airport, you'll see a Konami office right there next to the airport in Vegas. Yeah. So I can't imagine. Well, I mean, it would be strange if that Sony wants to buy this fitness center business.
Exactly.
As well.
They'd have to separate the game's IP or sell them
just
off.
the gaming business.
And then you run into the problem of, okay, well, now we have this IP. We can either give them to all of our studios who are already probably working on their own games, or then have to create a bunch of new studios, which again is a lot of money and time and will be a big process. Whereas a lot of these other companies we're talking about, you get a team, you get possibly IP, you get knowledge and institutional basis there. That's very valuable.
Well, here's a fun thing to think about. This is maybe an idea for your next episode of Podcast Beyond, Jonathan. If Sony were to buy Konami's gaming franchises, what Sony-owned studios would you like to see develop?
The perfect studios.
New entries in there. Yeah, that could be fun. A topic for another time. Ryan, before we hear your sort of guesses for Microsoft, I'd love to give you a chance to respond to Jonathan's guesses for Sony. He said NetherRealm, Arc Systems, Konami, maybe MiHoYo.
All of those make a ton of sense. Jonathan is on point as usual. I do think NetherRealm would be the one. That they're so wrapped up in, which Jonathan did talk about. I mean, they're so wrapped up in WB, and there was the rumor when WB was supposedly up for sale before that the new owner would, like AT&T was going to retain the Batman IP, and that whoever bought it would kind of have to make a deal. And so it sounded like it would be pretty complicated, and it may yet be. I mean, nobody's going to let go of the DC properties with very easily. I mean, those are extraordinarily valuable. Even though the studios themselves, very much including NetherRealm, are extremely valuable. And thankfully, as Jonathan, was specifically zeroing in on Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat's not, a DC situation. That is wholly NetherRealm owned scenario. So, yeah, I mean, it's Jonathan makes a lot of sense with those. I would, and they seem like those would make more sense for Sony than for Microsoft. Not that Microsoft wouldn't necessarily have interest in some of those, but those are all definitely those would be very Sony centric targets.
Yeah, I agree that no matter what happens with sort of WB in general, they're not getting rid of DC. They're holding on to Batman as much as they can. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it would be a very interesting time if Sony acquired some of those WB studios, licensed DC games, and then was making both DC games and Spider-Man and Wolverine at the same time.
It is interesting to consider. Okay, Ryan, what would make sense for Microsoft to want to pick up?
So again, Jonathan did a great job. We're trying to think strategically here. These are not fanboy wishes. These are things that we think from studying this industry day in and day out that could make a lot of sense. And I talked about this one on Podcast Unlocked this past week. I think Microsoft, they've made acquisitions from little studios like Compulsion's a smaller studio, all the way up to to Minecraft as a one studio but mega IP, on up to Bethesda and Activision Blizzard. So they've really run the gamut, and I don't think that they're necessarily going to buy nothing but giant publishers moving forward. I think there will be a mix, but if there is one more major third-party publisher out there that Microsoft could have its sights set on, I think actually Capcom could make a lot of sense, because Microsoft, for all the money they've spent and all the studios that they've grown and or acquired, only one of them is a Japanese studio. And Phil Spencer, the CEO of gaming now at Xbox, has talked many times over the years about how much he values the Japanese community, the game development community, and the Japanese market. And Microsoft, they only have Tango Gameworks, who ironically is currently busy finishing Ghostwire Tokyo, which will be a timed PlayStation exclusive for reasons we've already covered on this show in the past. So I think Japan could make a lot of sense. And Capcom, you're talking about not a giant mega publisher that would cost tens of billions of dollars probably, but one that would bring a lot of talent, some really established legacy IPs in the form of course, first and foremost, Resident Evil. There's really no horror game for all the genre checklisting, all the checking of the boxes that Microsoft's been doing. They don't have a horror game, let alone a major horror franchise. Resident Evil could certainly fulfill that. It's the biggest name in that genre in the entire industry. Street Fighter. Jonathan talked about a fighting game and Sony's stake in that. Well, Microsoft, the fighting game genre is a very important one. And yes, there was Killer Instinct at the beginning of the Xbox One generation, but Microsoft hasn't really dabbled in the fighting game space since. And while Ono-san did leave Capcom, he is no longer running the Street Fighter team, there's still certainly plenty of talent there and the Street Fighter IP. So that could make a lot of sense. You have Monster Hunter, which is a global big deal of a franchise, just a third person, action RPG, co-op, multiplayer driven game. So I really think Capcom could be one that makes a lot of sense as far as bigger stuff. And if you want to talk about just kind of slide down the scale a little bit, still big, but not like monolithically big, what about CD Projekt Red? Microsoft has an unending appetite these days for Western RPGs. I mean, for Final Fantasy 16 being PlayStation exclusive and some of the other great things that Sony's got going on in the RPG space. On the Western RPG side, Xbox has got that on lock right now across many different studios. And why not? I mean, you look at the kind of games that are successful now. Role-playing games are as big as ever, and big games that keep players invested for hundreds of hours are a big deal, and those are very valued. And so you look at Cyberpunk, you look at The Witcher, why not? Why not bring those? If you're gonna dig into your wallet and spend some money, if you buy CD Projekt Red and you can have them make, alternate between those two IPs, put out one of them every 5 years, and you've got two mega franchises that you can dip into on a consistent basis. That would be extraordinarily valuable. And then if you want to kind of go a little further down, even past that, I think you could see even the likes of somebody like a Playdead, makers of Limbo and Inside. Damon, I know you're like me, a huge fan of those games. Just as those boutique art games that could go on every platform, including mobile, if you wanted them to, as Limbo and Inside have over the years. Or, you might just want them making beautiful, artistic, like 10 out of 10 caliber video games, again, every 5 years. And if I'll throw out just one more real quick, you look at, again, kind of thinking about service games and long tail games. That is such a key economic component of the industry nowadays. What about Hello Games? No Man's Sky has endured and continues to thrive. It's as big and popular and high quality as ever. And you've got a talent like Sean Murray specifically, and that the rest of that team there. Who knows what they might cook up next? So those are ones I see, could be strategic targets for Microsoft in the coming months or years.
A lot of that makes sense, especially the smaller ones. Both Playdead and Hello Games sort of got their start, I think, alongside Xbox. Limbo was like a summer of arcade game. I'm pretty sure Inside launched on Xbox first. And before No Man's Sky, Hello Games was making Joe Danger.
Yeah.
That was the summer of arcade, Xbox Live arcade game as well. So that makes a lot of sense. What was the other one? Oh, CD Projekt. Do you think the debacle of the Cyberpunk launch makes that a less attractive purchase? No, you don't think so?
Not in the slightest.
Unfazed. Okay.
Not in the slightest. Particularly when you could say, if you're Microsoft, you could go, well, if we were able to make a deal with these guys, we could just throw them a ton of QA resources, a ton of playtest resources. You could help solve that specific problem that Cyberpunk had in the future.
Yeah, if anything, I assume it makes them probably more affordable to a certain extent.
Maybe brought the price down a little bit.
They're really interesting as one as well, because the Witcher obviously is now tied up as a big Netflix identity thing as well, and so to have that in the Xbox stable would also help them as PlayStation ramps up their movie and TV production as well.
That's right. There's the Halo TV series coming this year.
Yep.
All good points. Okay, what about a couple of these others? Obviously, if Microsoft acquires Activision Blizzard, it gets the best-selling game of the year every year for the past 10 plus years in Call of Duty. But Take-Two has the most profitable entertainment thing ever in Grand Theft Auto 5. I think that makes Take-Two untouchable?
It's a tough one. I don't know. That's the price definitely went up last month after that Zynga acquisition, because if you spend, what was it? I believe $12 billion and change on Zynga, that suddenly, if somebody else wanted to come in, a Microsoft, a Sony, whomever, and look to acquire Take-Two, well, you've now got to buy the Zynga portion as well. So it's you'd be looking at. I think Take-Two would probably become, if it were to be acquired by someone, it would probably be the second biggest deal in the history of video games out after the Activision deal. I don't think it would approach $69 billion. I don't think it would be anywhere near quite that, but it would not be cheap.
Jonathan, any thoughts on Take-Two?
No, I think Take-Two, at least for now, is one of those companies that wants to remain what it is and not necessarily be subsumed, as long as they're continuing to make what I assume are only the wild profits they make off of GTA 5, now nearly a decade strong. Continue to claim for stuff like Red Dead, even with online's issues here and there, and big franchises that are in the works and that they've kind of been preparing, like the return of BioShock. I mean, I definitely think that's something not to discount, how big BioShock is as a franchise and how large the appetite is for a new one. And so I think, especially as Ryan was saying, with Zynga in the mix, Take-Two feels like a company that right now wants to be its own thing.
The other one is Ubisoft, which has been fighting against a hostile takeover for 2 or 3 years now. So that would seem to indicate that it prefers to stay independent. But like Activision Blizzard, Ubisoft has had its own reckoning in recent, at least over the past year, because of allegations of a toxic workplace culture. And I believe in the Activision Blizzard case, that was something that sort of helped things along in terms of the acquisition. So I don't know. Do you don't feel like, maybe Ryan, start with you. You don't feel like Ubisoft would be an attractive option for Xbox?
I mean, they probably would. And when you mentioned the hostile takeover, that they did successfully fend off from Vivendi. So that is over. Yeah. That is not still a battle they are fighting. That all that said was that they didn't want to be hostilely taken over by Vivendi. It's not to say they might not want to be bought out for a major stock premium in the same way that Activision Blizzard agreed to be purchased if the right offer came along. But yeah, I mean, Ubisoft owns the Tom Clancy brand outright. The family, Clancy and the family, before Clancy passed, that was sold wholesale to Ubisoft. So you'd be getting some strong multiplayer centric franchises there. You'd of course be getting, they've made licensing deals for Avatar, for Star Wars. But yeah, I feel like Ubisoft, they seem like they're willing and wanting to forge ahead on their own for the time being. But they would certainly, there's a lot of valuable property under that umbrella for sure.
And Jonathan, Ubisoft is known for big open world action games. Sony kind of has that genre sewn up on its end with Ghost of Tsushima and Horizon and a couple other things. But Ubisoft also has a bunch of shooter games, and that's, shooters is a genre that kind of been a hole in Sony's portfolio recently. So I don't know, how do you think Ubisoft would look to Sony?
Yeah, it would definitely fill some genre gaps, absolutely, while complementing others. Yeah, I think, the Ubisoft open world model is a thing talked about a lot, but I would say in the PS4 generation, Horizon Zero Dawn and Ghost of Tsushima were some of the best open world games in general, surpassing a lot of Ubisoft open worlds. And so it's an interesting thing. Again, that is also one of the bigger companies that I don't think wants to be subsumed into another unless the money or the optics are correct. As you noted, it's impossible to not say that some of the optics of what's been going on with Activision Blizzard clearly factored into Kotick's decision making. But I think for now, Ubisoft is probably content to be on its own and continue to branch out in the way that it is. They've really invested in specific technologies and specific ideas and genres and franchises, and I don't think they see a need to fall under another company at the moment. But as we've said, after Activision, anything could change at a moment's notice, and I wouldn't be surprised at this point.
Well, we know more acquisitions are in the works. We'll probably be hearing about them before the end of the year. So if you have your own thoughts as to who Xbox and PlayStation might want to acquire, make sure to share them in the comments below.
Good thing we're still doing this show. It's a good thing that we're still going, because we just have new stuff to talk about every week now.
I know, it's true. Okay, I have the results of the last episode's poll. We asked who is going to have the most exciting year among the first-person platforms, PlayStation, Xbox, or Nintendo, and perhaps unsurprisingly, PlayStation won with our audience, almost 48% of the vote, but Xbox is not too far behind, 39%. So those are both very close. What I was a little bit surprised was Nintendo was really far behind, 13%, because we do still at this point expect them to have Breath of the Wild 2 coming. They just released Pokemon Legends Arceus, if that's how it's pronounced. They've got some other stuff like Splatoon 3 and Kirby and Bayonetta 3. And we know that the Switch was the best-selling console of 2021. So I don't know, Ryan, Jonathan, were either of you surprised that Nintendo came in so far behind the other two?
It's just because we haven't seen Breath of the Wild 2 in so long. It's out of people's minds right now because we don't know when it's coming and only Nintendo knows. So I think if we had put that poll up like just after a new trailer or gameplay presentation dropped, it might have changed the results of that poll.
Yeah, I think Breath of the Wild optimistically coming out this year is a big bet. And so if people aren't even thinking about it at the moment or, anticipating a delay of some kind because it's just the reality of development right now. A lot of things are getting delayed. I think there are some really great games to look forward to on Nintendo, but nothing at that level. And when you look at the possibilities for PlayStation, Xbox, they just seem a little bit at that mass appeal level, I think, right now.
Yep, that makes sense. Before we go, we have a new poll for you to vote on for next episode. We mentioned the Halo TV series coming later this year. With the Halo TV series on the way, what other games do you want to see adapted for television? Not for film, but you think they would work particularly well for a television series? Something like Destiny, Mass Effect, Zelda, Assassin's Creed. Make sure to vote at IGN.com and we'll share the results with you next episode. And that will do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch. Thank you to both Ryan and Jonathan. Thank you to Alan working behind the scenes to make this show possible. We'll be back next Friday, 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern with more Next Gen Console news, quote unquote, current gen console news. I'm Daemon Hatfield. We'll see you then.